Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this Cambridge Ukrainian Studies webinar, Russia's Aggression Against Ukraine, Black Sea Perspectives. My name is Rory Finnin. I'm Associate Professor of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Cambridge. I'll be moderating the discussion this evening. The Kremlin's military encirclement of Ukraine, its escalating aggression against Ukraine, they have rightly dominated global headlines at the moment. Estimates of roughly 150,000 Russian troops are positioned, poised on Ukraine's borders, with daily increases of Russian military personnel and heavy equipment, especially in Belarus. And the threat of this dynamic escalation, an escalation of Europe's 8-year undeclared war, has sent diplomatic efforts into overdrive, as US and UK governments in particular deliver much needed military assistance. So given the pace of these developments, it is often difficult to get a handle on the whys, the wheres, the hows of this crisis. The number of reports, in my opinion, the news analyses, particularly since December, can be head spinning at times. So at the outset, I just want to make two simple points clear for the entire audience. The first point is that the gravity of this is not to be underestimated. We are facing the likelihood of a dramatic escalation of a war between Europe's two largest countries, a war that has already killed thousands and displaced millions of people. The second point is that there are a lot of geopolitical and geostrategic drivers of this crisis, but at its core, this war is about a former empire, Russia, refusing to allow a former imperial possession, Ukraine, to exercise its independence and sovereignty and pursue its own path. And more broadly, I think it's about the defense of liberal democracy and the international legal order in the face of a neo-imperialist authoritarian power. So obviously that's a lot to process. And we can't unpack it all, nor do we wish to this evening. Our objective with this session today is to try to focus in particular on Ukraine's Black Sea perspectives, which are particularly urgent given the ongoing militarization of Crimea since 2014, given Crimea's close proximity to Donbas and the war in Donbas, roughly 300 miles away. This is a frozen conflict and a hot war in very close contact. We also have to take into account, of course, past acts of Russian military aggression against Ukrainian assets in the Black Sea and the Azov Sea as well. We are right now speaking a great deal about NATO, about NATO's role, but in the West, we tend, in my view, to overlook NATO member Turkey, which has constructive relations with both Ukraine and Russia, constructive relations despite the fact that in recent years, Ukraine has called on Turkey to close the straits of the Bosporus and Dardanelles to Russian vessels, despite the fact that Russian generals have celebrated a new dominance over the Turkish Navy while masking and denying aggression against Ukraine, despite the fact that, of course, Russia has fired on Russian jets and partnered with Ukraine in NATO exercises. So as Neil Asherson, the author of Black Sea, once put it, quote, "The world has learned to worry about the Black Sea region," unquote. So to address this worry head on, to help us make sense of this crisis, we have three very distinguished guests with rich backgrounds in the advanced study of Ukraine, Turkey, and Russia. Asli Aydıntaşbaş is a senior policy fellow with the wider Europe program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Her areas of expertise are Turkish foreign policy and the external ramifications of Turkey's domestic politics. She joined ECFR after a long and noted career in journalism. Highlights of her work include a tenure as Washington correspondent and later the Ankara bureau chief for Sabah, one of Turkey's leading newspapers, as a columnist at Milliyet, another leading newspaper, and as a television host on CNN Turk, where I first saw her, in fact. We are very glad to have her join us to provide a much needed and often overlooked perspective from Turkey. We have as well with us today Petro Burkovskyi, who is senior fellow at the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation, one of Ukraine's oldest and most influential independent think tanks. His areas of expertise include security policy, energy policy, disinformation and propaganda, and international relations. And he's written often about the Russian maneuvers on the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, maneuvers that have threatened to destabilize not only Ukraine, but the entire region. Before joining the Democratic Initiatives Foundation, Petro worked for 14 years at Ukraine's National Institute for Strategic Studies as head of the Center for Advanced Russia Studies, among other roles. Volodymyr Dubovyk is professor of international relations at Mechnikov National University in Odesa on Ukraine's Black Sea coast, and director of the Institute of International Studies. His areas of expertise include US-Ukraine relations, Ukraine's foreign policy, and Black Sea security studies. And Volodymyr has a very diverse background working with Kennan Institute, the Wilson Center, and researching and teaching at the universities of Maryland, Washington, Texas, and the list goes on. So this is a distinguished panel indeed. And Asli, Petro, Volodymyr, thank you once again for joining us. We have planned for this exchange to be an informal Q&A for about 45 minutes. Followed by questions that I will gather from our attendees through the Q&A box on your screen. So we really welcome you to type in a question at any point in the conversation. Please feel free, and I will then gather them, relay them to our panelists. Asli, I would like to begin with you. Turkey under Recep Tayyip Erdogan has worked to build constructive relations with both Ukraine and Russia. Could you give us a sense of what Erdogan's approach to navigating Turkish-Ukrainian and Turkish-Russian relations has been since 2014, since the Crimean annexation, and how these recent maneuvers and escalations are affecting his calculus, if at all?
Hi, thank you, Rory, and thanks for inviting me. A decade ago, if we had met while you were in Turkey, I'd never have guessed that I would be on a panel talking about the possibility of war in Europe, no less about war between two of Europe's largest countries. And as you have pointed out, it is a very dramatic moment. And the drama is, of course, felt outside of Ukraine, including in Turkey, where I am. Turkey does have a special relationship with Ukraine. Not only is it a NATO country, but over the past few years, of course, Erdogan himself, as you've pointed out, developed a very close relationship with Zelensky, and Turkey has been supplying Ukraine with armed drones, and which are currently being used, I am told, in Donbas. We don't know how many drones. This is the crown jewel of Turkey's ambitious defense industry, and Ukraine is clearly being one of the countries Ankara felt close to. And it's a symbiotic relationship, of course. Ukraine is also helping with Turkey's own defense industry, particularly with their know-how. And there is no doubt in my mind that people in Ankara feel very nervous about Russian desire to renegotiate European security architecture. Turkey has consistently supported the independence of countries in the former, in the post-Soviet space, has played a role, has supported NATO's expansion, and played a role in acclimating these countries into the transatlantic community. Having said all that, and having actually underlined Turkey's special relationship with Ukraine, there's obviously a historic bond too. Let me add, before I get to the but part, let me also add that there is a historic bond. The Ottomans and Russians have fought numerous wars, some of which was for control of territory or what is now in the southern parts of Ukraine. Now, history is history, and obviously modern Turkey has moved on. Nonetheless, when you do see Russian expansion or renegotiation of borders in the post-Soviet space, there is something in the Turkish statecraft that does feel very nervous. No doubt about that. That historic memory stays with us. And Crimea, of course, has been an emotional topic because it's a distant and faint memory, but no less people have felt, have felt very upset about the Russian invasion of Crimea. Having said all that, I want to add, and before I turn to you again, because I don't want to monopolize this conversation, there's a huge but, which is Erdogan's ultimate balancing act. Erdogan is very transactional when it comes to these matters, and Ukraine is the only country that he's become very close to. He's also very close to Vladimir Putin. He's also taken Turkey to a place of a strategic and economic dependence, in my view, on Russia that is going to matter in the decisions that Turkey takes over the next few months. Turkey has become rather dependent on Russian gas, but Russian for its, obviously for heating and for its industry, but there's one more aspect, I think, which is Syria. This may not be a huge discussion in Ukraine, but Syria does present huge vulnerabilities for Turkey and Erdogan. That is to say, Russians have the upper hand in Syria. It is thanks perhaps to Turkey also wanting to push out Americans, but Americans seem to have a very small footprint and Russia does control the airspace. But beyond that, each and every Turkish incursion in Syria, Turkey's establishment of a safe zone in the northern part, and have been in events that took place after a Russian green light. Basically, Turkey is able to operate in Syria with a nod and a green light from Moscow. And I want to underline that because I think that is exactly the pressure point for Turkey and will determine the red lines. I have no doubt that Turkey would want to continue supplying Ukraine with drones or help stepping up its military engagement, but how much and how far and how deep will essentially be determined, I think, not by Ankara so much, but by the red lines that are going to be established in Moscow. And that does, if that does sound very alarmist, I have to remind you that while Ukraine is a very important strategic matter for all European countries and for Turkey, Syria is existential for Turkey. And in Syria, Turkish vulnerability when it comes to Russia is so much so that in Idlib, in northern Syria, where 2-3 million Syrian refugees live, it would only take several Russian sorties, Russian jets or regime jets, the Syrian army jets flying over towns and villages and tents and makeshift refugee camps to get a few million people running to the Turkish border. Once again, Turkey's safe zone Turkey is able to operate a safe zone in some parts of its border, in part because of a handshake between Vladimir Putin and Erdogan. I'm not even going to go into aspects of economic dependency with Russians building Turkey's first nuclear reactor, huge gas contracts, and the Turk Stream, which brings Russian gas directly to Turkey. So I think these are the reasons, this is me speaking, and not a Turkish official, but just an independent analyst. These are the reasons I think Erdogan will talk tough as he heads to Kiev this week. I have no doubt that he'll deliver strong message, but when it comes to a war setting, I think he'll go for a balancing act, step up his support for Ukraine to the point that doesn't aggravate Moscow or that doesn't cause a Russian reprisal, but fall short of a place which might actually lead Russia to respond. And maybe in the second half, of course, this is what my analysis, and I think this is going to be the name of the Turkish balancing act caught between NATO and Putin, two strategic allies. Erdogan wants to use this to improve his relations with NATO, with the United States, with sort of his Western allies. But I feel that there's only so much he will go precisely because Putin seems to have so much leverage over Turkey and over the government at this point, based on Syria and based on Turkish economy and the inroads Russia has made in Turkish economy.
I really appreciate you bringing up both Syria and then the Turk Stream issue as well, which are really key. I'm interested in what you mentioned earlier about the nervousness in Ankara, and I'm curious about the Turkish public, if you can generalize a little bit. Is the story of this escalation playing to everyone's nerves in Turkey? And I'm also wondering whether you could consider the domestic angle presented by the Crimean Tatar diaspora, which for our viewers is quite numerous and substantial in Turkey. It's estimated somewhere between 2 to 4 million highly organized organizations run by Crimean Tatars who are very close to the Crimean Tatar Mejlis. So I'm interested in whether, on the one hand, the Turkish public is paying close, nervous attention, as we all are, to these unfolding events, and whether this Crimean Tatar factor is in any way a component of this calculus for Erdogan's domestic politics.
Well, Rory, I'm not sure that it is, because in 2014, Turkey did obviously strongly condemn the annexation of Crimea, and Erdogan has said repeatedly, as late as this September at the United Nations, that Turkey does not recognize the annexation of Crimea. This sentiment is sincere. There is no doubt in my mind, and I say that even as someone who often criticizes Erdogan, there's no doubt that in my mind the Turks and people and Turkish establishment and state and the public is deeply offended by Crimea, Russian annexation of Crimea. Having said that, also notice that Turkey has not joined the Western sanctions on after the annexation of Crimea, which is exactly the kind of fine line that I am talking about. The not fine or not so fine maybe, but the balancing act that I am talking about. Crimean Tatars have been important. People still remember songs about Sevastopol and the Crimean War. They don't know what the song is about, but it is, but they know the song and all of that. So it is there in memory. But the reality is, Turkey has also been very careful about making sure that it is outreach in Crimea, particularly to the Tatar community, is at levels is at levels that are acceptable to Moscow. Now, outside of Crimea, it has embraced Crimean Tatars and their cause and so on. Just like it has done with Uyghurs. It has Turkey. Ankara seems to have observed a certain level, whereby a certain level designed not to offend the big player here. With the Uyghurs in China, Uyghurs live in Istanbul. They're welcomed in Istanbul. They're organized here. They're close, but they're. But then Turkey has not picked up their cause externally in the same way Erdogan has done with Palestinians, in the same way Erdogan has done with, say, back a decade ago with a Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. It no longer does that because of a change in policy. So I think once again it is there, the feelings are there, and the policy is there. But also a sort of a treading on that space gingerly and the balancing act because of Russia.
Petro and Volodymyr, I recall very vividly Erdogan visiting Kyiv and standing with Zelensky, reviewing soldiers in formation in Kyiv and declaring on a microphone, "Slava Ukraini," glory to Ukraine, to which all the soldiers responded, "Heroyam Slava," of course, glory to the heroes. Could you give us a sense of Zelensky's view on this Turkish relationship and that Turkish factor in NATO? Has there been any evolution in Turkish-Ukrainian relations, particularly since Poroshenko? Petro, maybe you can begin first.
Thank you, Rory. Hello to everybody. Well, I would say the key message is that Zelensky inherited Ukrainian-Turkish relations from Poroshenko times. And I remember that while I was working at the institute, then in 2016, we noticed how Turkey used the drones in their conflict in Syria, and how they use it. Of course, they use it against Kurds, but also they use it against forces that were supported by Russians. And we said to ourselves, look, the Turkey picks the fights with Russia alone in Syria, and is not afraid of taking this fight and challenging the Russian standing. And that was the Turkish policy of challenging some kind of territory in Syria and protecting its interests in Syria, despite the fact that the other party is the nuclear power. So from that time, I think there were several reports which advised the enhanced military technical cooperation between Turkey and Russia. And yes, we do understood all of these sensitive things that just Asli mentioned, that yes, there are economic interests, there are energy interests, and there is a dependency. However, how we perceived Turkey, it is a NATO member, and at the same time, it's not a part of the European Union. What does it mean? It means that at the very end, Turkey is protected by the Article 5 and nuclear American arsenal, which means that in case of major trouble, it will be protected. And it actually makes in certain spheres, it makes Turkey more free than the European partners, but it also makes Turkey more vulnerable, because if Russia decides to punish it economically, this burden won't be shared by the European Union, and that is very important. But in security sector, it's so we can start a cooperation. And Russia cannot, how to say, it will of course object to it, but it cannot stop because it's a security dimension, and Turkey in this sphere is protected by NATO. So Zelensky won elections, and the talks about the deliveries of drones started well before he was in office, and these drones were delivered in the late 2019 after the Paris talks, and they were put into the service and they were used in Donbas. Russians were unpleasantly surprised by this fact, but it also showed that this was the stress test for we think that it was not only the stress test for the Ukraine, but also a stress test for NATO, and how NATO members, all NATO members, what they would say in this situation, whether they will say in favor of Turkey and protect these interests of sovereign rights to establish this kind of military technical cooperation with any state which desires to do that. Then I think that the new administration, they just decided to keep the track, and maybe to make it even more friendly and more open toward Turkey. They accelerated talks about the free trade area between Turkey and Ukraine. However, we also have to understand that, and I think the Turkey understands this, that the Russian market is bigger than Ukrainian. However, right now we see the new situation that Russia could fall under the severe sanctions. Whether the situation would de-escalate or whether it will de-escalate, I think that the West is moving towards the cutting ties with Russia, and that will that will be detrimental for the Russian domestic market. So the Russian domestic market would start to reduce, and this is also puts the question whether it is a good thing, a wise thing to keep the dependency, energy dependency, and the economic dependency, the economic cooperation with Russia for such countries as Turkey. So far, Ukraine cannot substitute Russia as an economic partner And of course, Ukraine cannot play without Crimea. Ukraine cannot play the same security role in the Black Sea region as it was before the war. But still, we hope that Turkey, in any development of the situation, the Turkey would follow the words of the Çavuşoğlu. I think it's a foreign minister who said that right now it's time for dialogue and deterrence. And therefore, I see the new initiative proposed by Turkish President Erdogan, that he can bring together Putin and Zelensky and try to facilitate direct talks between them and facilitate possible peace arrangement. But at the same time, Turkey would not stop cooperation, defense cooperation with Ukraine, because it's a part of deterrence.
Volodymyr, how do you view this relationship, and do you think that Erdogan's offer of mediation is a productive one? Is there much promise of anything new there?
First of all, thank you, Rory, for inviting me to this event, and I have many warm memories from my previous visit for your postgraduate PhD seminar a few years ago in Cambridge. So it's a pleasure to be back virtually right now.
We've missed you.
Yeah, thank you. And then on the subject, I would like to say that I'm not sure if Zelensky is really understanding enough the potential role of Erdogan, Ankara in this situation, but he is now, basically grasping for the straws. Situation is difficult. There is tension around our borders, obviously escalation of Russian troops around borders. And Zelensky is looking for whoever is going to give him a life jacket, and if Erdogan will do that, that's even better. And you mentioned already that there is some good chemistry indeed between Zelensky and Erdogan. And Turkey worries a lot about the situation in the region, because a major conflict between Russia and Ukraine would definitely be detrimental to Turkish interests in the region, and that should be said right away. Turkey was actually for years advocating the point of view that the Black Sea doesn't need outsiders to settle affairs here in the region, and that we have enough of the capacity here in the region, the Black Sea powers, to deal with issues and conflicts and challenges. But that notion, and Turkey developed several interesting multilateral frameworks, like Black Sea Harmony and Black Sea 4. But that notion that locals will do it, was it fine, and will manage to take care of their security, was already received a major blow in 2008 when Russia attacked Georgia. And we can remember actually that Turkey prevented some American battleships from entering into the Black Sea. And then in 2014, of course, another blow. And now it's what's going on right now. I mean, it's definitely once and for all, we know that the locals would not be able to settle the situation, because there's too many conflicts. The Black Sea, to me, for years, I was looking into this correlation of potential for cooperation on one hand and confrontation on another. And for some time, it was kind of balanced, and I was waiting to see which one prevails. But in recent years, of course, no doubt, it's confrontation. There is no collective security, there is nothing. There is pure realpolitik that you have in the region. And Turkey tries to place both sides, because Ukraine is important, indeed, Russia is as well. In addition to energy supply, there is Syria already been mentioned. There is actually a clash in Libya as well. And the Kurdish question, I wouldn't put it away completely out of conversation, because for decades, Moscow, before the end of Cold War, was playing with Kurdish movement and supporting it, to, of course, the much annoyment of Ankara. And of course, no one in Ankara wants to break China with Russia, to see them doing that again, because they can. And there are many issues, but Erdogan is coming to Kyiv, they say this coming Thursday, and we'll see. There'll be probably a signing of a new contract on a Bayraktar aerial unmanned drones, which is a big deal. They've been bought. I mean, it's not it's not that Turkey just gives us those drones, but we are buying them. But they prove to be useful. Actually, the major outburst of emotions from Moscow happened just some time ago, when the Ukraine, for the first time at the front line, used one of those Bayraktars. So really nervous about that. We've seen how they work really well in the recent Azerbaijani-Armenian war. So yeah, the military defense cooperation will go on, the trade will go on, the position of Turkey on Crimea, the principal position on Ukraine's territorial integrity will stay. But at the same time, there will be a continuation of certain rapprochement that we've seen in recent years between Turkey and Russia. Turkey is an important player, I call it regional superpower, but even the attempts to create some kind of dual protectorate over the Black Sea region by Moscow and Ankara didn't quite work, because there are many other players in the region, including Ukraine, including Georgia. Romania obviously is very active, very ambitious. Bulgaria is scared very much so by the current situation, and when Russia demanded that everything in NATO should be reversed to pre-1997, it took even the Prime Minister of Bulgaria, which has a major current of pro-Russian feelings in it, to have a very strong, powerful statement about Russia trying to interfere in their affairs. So, if anyone in Black Sea region was nervous, then anxious, right now it's a frenzy. It's a complete state of frenzy. No one is feeling safe right now, and it's a very volatile situation.
Can you fill us in a little bit more about what Erdogan's rationale is for offering mediation? I mean, is this him playing to his domestic electorate, or does he see, or is there an understanding that actually the Minsk format, the Normandy format, they're all useless, and that something new has to occur? What is the basis of that something new? Asli, do you have?
Sure. I mean, I'll start, and then maybe Volodymyr would also like to chime in. Erdogan does not want this war precisely because it would put Turkey in a very tough spot with Russia. Everything's been said about drones. He's going to Kiev. There will be continued interest in supporting Ukrainian military, but that opens up Turkey for all types of reprisals and perhaps a period in Syria that will be very difficult. So on the one hand, there's the instinct. There's several instincts, I think, that Erdogan has in wanting to make this all go away. He believes in his personal relationship with Putin. Sort of a handshake between these two men have made many things happen. They've established a safe zone, the Idlib operation, and stopping it. Turkey, several incursions, all of that. Turkey's purchase of S-400s. So I think he does know that he has some cachet with Putin, but also he does not necessarily want to create this geopolitical nightmare that Volodymyr talked about in the Black Sea, which would obviously open up all types of pressures on Turkey from both sides, from NATO and also the Russians, both not just drones. There is aid and drone parts, but also the Black Sea and Bosphorus and access to the Black Sea and all of that. So I think that on some level he wants to genuinely. I think there is a feeling also that if there is to be a war scenario and sanctions on Russia, that would impact the Turkish economy as well. Russians have bought big banks here. I mean, they are doing, natural gas and other critical projects here. So that obviously does create shockwaves in Turkish economy at a time when Erdogan is undergoing a very big economic downturn. And don't forget that this is an increasingly illiberal regime, increasingly authoritarian, but it's still a regime where you have to get elected. Elections still matter, and elections are a year from now, and poll numbers are not looking good for President Erdogan at all. In fact, he is facing an anti-Erdogan majority with an opposition that's increasingly more coordinated. One of the reasons, this is not by any means the top reason, this is, but down there, one of the reasons, of course, he understands that such a role on international stage bringing Zelensky, perhaps Zelensky and Putin and all of that is really something that would elevate his standing both with NATO allies, but also domestically. So these are some of the reasons I think that is leading him to sort of jump in. He's going to be visiting Kiev on the 3rd, and Turkish officials are hoping that Putin, maybe they can persuade Kremlin for Putin to pay a visit after the Winter Olympics in China, which is after the 20th of February. But from what I understand, there isn't a clear commitment from Putin. So more than what Zelensky would do, I'm sure he would be on some level open to peace negotiations or diplomacy. What is not clear to me is whether or not Putin would accept this offer, this intermediation offer by Erdogan.
Volodymyr, you were about to jump in there.
Right. On the last point, I also think that Putin might just say no to the Erdogan's proposal, because Russia right now tries to present itself and posit itself as a great power, or almost like a superpower. And that's why they want to talk to Americans, for instance. To NATO, okay, we can. Anyone else is just below superpower. You know, it's not our level. And then therefore they might say Turkey, well, important player in the Black Sea region, but not important enough. So they might just discard this suggestion by Erdogan to come for the trilateral talks, Ukraine, Russia, and Turkey. Another thing is, of course, is that Turkey is suggesting that the Minsk process should be moved out of Minsk, because the Ukrainians these days are not very happy about this idea of continuing Minsk at all, but definitely not in the city of Minsk, because Belarus is siding clearly with Russia in these preparations for the invasion, possible invasion. And that could be working out, but Erdogan has to do something. I mean, he would probably be liking sitting on the fence, but he couldn't afford to. And he needs to get off the fence, sometimes to one direction, sometimes to another direction. He's also a very ambitious man, still is. Look, there've been zero problem concept. Didn't work. They have tons of problems on no borders. There've been this idea that there is a Turkish model that might be attractive for a lot of countries in the greater Middle East. Didn't work. You know, so he is really, you know, in a state of resentment right now. And if you add domestic context, which Asli mentioned, you know, he needs to do something, and he would hate to choose sides if it comes to that. So that's why he's trying to prevent the conflict. You know, it's going to be a painful moment for him, and he's trying, and he's testing patience of Putin with Bayraktars and other things as well. And his statements about Ukraine's territorial integrity and who knows what else. And he also said just the other day that after all, we are a NATO country and we'll do what would be in NATO interests, and we stick with NATO. So that was a very important statement. I mean, because a lot of people were basically kind of expecting some kind of a drift of Turkey away from the rest of NATO. Not happening here, at least rhetorically. He says, if NATO takes a decision, we follow the decision as a loyal member state within NATO. So that's an interesting moment for this trilateral relations and for everyone else in the region, because I said it's not just about these three, but it's also about some other countries that find themselves in the region, in the South Caucasus, and countries like Romania and Bulgaria as well.
Well, thank you. Petro.
The first time I heard when Turkish president proposed to mediate between our president and Putin, I wondered what he has in pockets and what is his proposal. As far as I understand, the authoritarian leaders, both of them are authoritarian leaders, they, in case of personal diplomacy, they always hope, despite the fact that they try to portray themselves as a strong leaders, they very often try a fortune. And in the personal diplomacy, a lot of calculations is made on the fortune. And from this point of view, maybe I will present quite a strange suggestion, but I think that what he can propose, what Turkey can propose to Russia, maybe it will look at the experience of dealing with Russia in Syria or in Libya or in the Caucasus. Erdogan proved himself as a leader who picks up the fight, but at the same time, he somehow understands where to stop fighting and start negotiations and start reasonable negotiations based on the results of the war. And maybe the Turkish calculation is that why Russia and Ukraine would not try to test the Northern Cyprus variant when the conflict is frozen, when the international peacekeepers are put on the line of contact and the conflict is freezed, and people will continue to live in peace, while at the same time Russia would continue to exercise power over the occupied areas of Donbas in the same way Turkey exercises power and influence over the Northern Cyprus. But the Ukraine and Russia would continue to develop their countries. Why not try to do this? Or the variant in Syria, when just agree this what is conquered, and then it should be stopped, just to stop to impose to settle the ceasefire, to stop fighting, and then to avoid the worst scenario and avoid the economic consequences for Russia. So it will be very interesting for me to look at this meeting and why it's also interesting. That will also show to Turkey with whom they are dealing, because I think they have a false understanding of Putin logics. He does not want to fix the damage. It seems like this. He wants to bring as much damage as possible, because under his calculations, Russia has reserves to sustain the pain, while the West is not ready for the very direct conflict. And at the end of the day, the West would back off, would make steps back, and Russia would regain its sphere of influence in Europe and also in the Black Sea. And I think that even the failure of such trilateral talks between Ukraine, Russia, and Turkey would be very useful for Turkey to understand, finally to understand what is Russia is the player in the region.
Now that we've shifted the optics a little bit towards this Black Sea triad and set the stage for our viewers, I'm of course very interested in us talking through Ukraine's vulnerabilities with respect to this prospective invasion and the threat that these troops are posing, and particularly the rhetoric from the Kremlin. The discussion often, at least in Western media, has been focused a great deal on the buildup of troops to the north and east of the northern and eastern borders of Ukraine. Zelensky recently raised the specter of problems in Kharkiv, for instance. We've been talking about the prospect of false flag operations, provocations. In many places, I see, in particular, the southern border of Ukraine, particularly vulnerable, places like Berdyansk, Mariupol, etc. How do you feel about this, this Black Sea coast, particularly given the implications of the Crimean annexation and this hyper-militarization of the peninsula that's been going on since 2014, in some ways under the radar? We haven't paid as close attention to all the military personnel and equipment that have been stationed there. To what degree should we be really looking at Crimea when we think of this prospective invasion? Volodymyr, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, yes, of course, Crimea, it started with Crimea, so we shouldn't forget about that, the major act of annexation or attempt of annexation, but de facto occupation that is going on there since February of 2014. Crimea is not often mentioned these days, and that would be one of the reasons. Could be that the Russians actually are pushing with their escalation right now to force Ukraine to forfeit Crimea and say, okay, fine, we are fine, you can take Crimea, we'll probably come up with some kind of statement that we admit this, but let us be, the rest of Ukraine, and of course, please return Donbas. But I don't think they would do that, and I don't think the Ukrainian government would actually do that as well, because there is a strong position of civil society, of the population, of the people in Ukraine. That's interesting because Putin, of course, does what he does, what he wants. Here in Ukraine, be it Zelensky or or Poroshenko before him, Yanukovych before him, no one is completely having complete power. The street does have a lot of power. So Zelensky is really afraid if he goes too far in terms of some kind of concessions to Russia, that he will be probably not necessarily swept away from power, but definitely would have problem with a lot of big segment of Ukrainian population, Ukrainian society. So he's maneuvering and sometimes quite clumsy. When he gives a video message to the population, and one moment he says don't panic, and then the next moment he says learn shooting. Like, what kind of message is that? And with Kharkiv as well, completely out of his top of his head, he is speaking in a major Ukrainian city and saying, well, you know what, maybe they'll take Kharkiv. How irresponsible was that? Why would he even mention any city in Ukraine? You can say, if Ukrainian president, they can take some territory, but without naming any city and causing, panic in a major Ukrainian city, the second biggest after Kiev. Many things now. The other day he said that he regrets Americans, paying too much attention to Russian troops on Ukraine's borders. What kind of signal is that? I mean, unfortunately, there is probably a lack of trust then between Washington and Kyiv in such a decisive moment. And already today, the Russian representative to the United Nations at the special meeting of the Security Council, he already is quoting Zelensky, talking to American representative, and he's saying, well, Ukrainian president the other day, he said that he doesn't think there is a major threat. He doesn't think that Russia is threatening Ukraine. And he actually thinks, Russian representative said about Zelensky, that the West is the one which is aggravating situation and, igniting all this tension and so on. So there's been some missteps on the part of Ukrainian leadership for sure, and I just wonder if they have enough preparations for the possible invasion. It's going to be a difficult time, and I still hope that there will be no invasion, no full-scale invasion. But again, even if it's a small invasion, that's a problem. And going back to the kind of infamous press conference of President Biden, when he said when there's minor incursion, maybe it's not a big deal. For Ukraine, of course, I mean, for Biden, maybe. For Ukraine, it's going to be a big deal anyway. Whatever, even the smallest, most minor incursion would be a problem. But yeah, I think that Turkey might play a role of mediator, and not only Turkey needs Russia on board, but also Russia actually treats Turkey with respect as well, and it couldn't allow to treat Turkey otherwise. We can remember how the Russian jet was shut down. I mean, many other countries would have a major problems with Russia if they do that. But then somehow Erdogan and Putin managed in a very short time to restore relations to even a higher level than they were before. So it's a lot of balancing here, and everyone needs everyone here, and there's a lot of playing here. And I think if we have enough time later, we can get back to the US role in the region as well, which is a fascinating subject by itself.
Absolutely. Petro, here in the UK, there is rather insufficient understanding of Crimea's resource insecurity. That is, how dependent it is and how historically it's been dependent on fresh water from mainland Ukraine, from what the Crimean Tatars used to call the Dnipro fields. To what extent should we be watching events from that southern side with respect to Crimea, and what has your research revealed about the Ukrainian feelings, or the feelings of Ukrainian civil society toward Crimea today, 8 years after the annexation?
All right, thank you, Rory. If you allow me, I will just make a short presentation about how Ukrainians feel about the Crimea. Oh, let me just try it and ask whether you see it. Okay. Okay, yep. Dear colleagues, do you see it?
Yeah,
so we do.
So yes, this is we conducted 3 polls in 16, 18, and the last year in July. And from this figure, you can see that actually the number of people who think that the Crimea should be part of Ukraine remain practically the same, almost 2/3, but the numbers are declining. And the reason why they are declining is that people are losing faith that it can be done in the nearest future, And why, if we also ask those respondents who think that it's impossible to restore Ukraine's sovereignty over Crimea, and we ask why, and the top reason for that was the formidable Russian military presence in Crimea. So actually, people feel that this is the threat not only to Crimea, but not only to the future of Crimea, but also to all of the Ukrainian South. And the biggest numbers of people who said that the Russian military presence is the key obstacle for restoration of Ukraine's sovereignty, they live in the southern regions, Odesa, Mykolaiv, and Kherson regions. So all three regions that have Black Sea coast. So this is just a very brief illustration of how Ukrainians are feeling about the Crimea and possible chances for restoration of sovereignty. So I think that it's also very important to look at how people think about the Turkish people, the Crimean Tatars who live in Crimea, and some of them have had to settle down in Ukraine and to leave Crimea. And despite the fact that Russia is saying that Ukraine is an authoritarian state, that the national minorities are prosecuted in Ukraine. However, you can see that as time goes on, more and more people support the autonomy of the Crimean Tatars, national autonomy of the Crimean Tatars in Crimea. So right now, it's the majority of population, like 57% would support. And moreover, majority also, almost 60%, yes, 60% of the people support the giving the Crimean Tatars the status of indigenous people, which make them a privileged national minority of Ukraine. And that also goes contrary to the Russian propaganda, which says that this law about indigenous people, it's about discrimination of the Russian-speaking people. In fact, also majority of Russian speakers support this law, so it's nothing more than just the Putin's propaganda. So, but if we speak about the security situation, I would only add to what Volodymyr have said, is that if we imagine the situation when which can change completely the security in the Black Sea region, is the successful amphibious military assault of Russia against Odessa, and capture of Odessa region on all the seaports of Ukraine on the seashore. That would not be a major event. It will be a limited military operation, but that would deal a very serious blow to Ukrainian economy. And then it will be a question what Ukraine will do if Russian troops will be successful in capturing these cities and these ports, whether they will continue fighting, and what Russia will do next, whether it will escalate to the full conflict, or whether it will try to impose a new peace agreement on Ukraine, which will be more humiliating than the Minsk agreement. So despite the fact that everybody is speaking about the Belarus, the troops in Belarus and troops to the east of Ukraine, I think from the economic point of view and geoeconomic point of view, the Ukrainian South is much more interesting to Kremlin than other parts of Ukraine.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Volodymyr, do you have anything to add on that question of the South being, let's say, attractive to the Kremlin for a lot of reasons? Because, you know, one could argue that the annexation of Crimea is not over. That is, you know, if you want to secure Crimea over the long term, you have to secure its resource provision. They took care of some of this with the land bridge, but the question of fresh water supply and droughts in Crimea is a really pressing one. So do you have any views on that?
Yes, of course. We are vulnerable here, obviously. I mean, we've lost 70% of our battleships in 2014, and and that wasn't the big navy anyway, even then. So right now it's really a small navy. We're basically, getting this smaller boats. There is a concept of mosquito fleet that is something, it's more of a coast guard really than the navy, but at least something better than nothing. And I think even in one of the questions there from the audience, it was mentioned that Turkey is building a bigger ship for Ukraine at the corvette size, if I'm not mistaken. So that's not just drones; it's also a contract for the bigger ship. Vulnerable, so from a seaside attack, and that's why we worry here a lot. Some of those plans that were leaked to the press, whoever leaked it, because actually it could be Russia, and that would actually fit into this intimidation tactics really well, that they will go after this region, obviously. And there is a bunch of Russian battleships specialized in making this landing operations coming through Mediterranean, I think, as we speak, to the Black Sea from the Baltic. So yes, people worry about all this. Even if they don't attack, and hopefully they wouldn't, because we're talking about big populated territories here, including my hometown where I'm at right now, they might disrupt the trade. That's another thing. What they did with Azov, because Azov Sea is basically blockaded by Russia. But they've been a lot of talking about maybe blockading trade from Black Sea ports in Ukraine, including Kherson, Mykolaiv, Odesa, and two other smaller ports nearby, Pivdenny and Chernomorsk. They can do that too, because they've practiced this area denial actions in the past, and we'll see what happens. Because of course that would be a major blow at the Ukraine's interest.
I hope to be wrong, but I am somewhat more pessimistic in terms of how far Turkey can go in supporting Ukraine precisely because of Syria. But, it's my subjective analysis, of course. I may end up being wrong. And war does create situations in which people plan on a course, but something else happens along the way. Accidents do happen. So if the Russians end up going too far in Syria in trying to give Turkey a message, for example, that would not, that would create a different situation. Turkey does want to use this as an opportunity to improve relations with the West. But if the West is entirely oblivious to Erdogan's attempt, that could create a different situation. So it's a very dynamic, I think, field. But sorry, Petro, all this is in the way of explaining my pessimism.
Yes, I just wanted to ask that in 2018, in November, as you know, Russia seized the three Ukrainian ships in the Strait of Kerch. And that resulted in a war alarm and imposition of, for 30 days, we had a martial law in Ukraine. And there was possible alarm that Russia can use this as a pretext for some kind of a new incursion or invasion. So did you heard that time, did Turkey had any contingency plan if the major war will happen in the Black Sea, I mean, between Ukraine and Russia, in the Azov Sea and in the Ukrainian Black Sea coast? Did you heard about anything?
I'm sure Turkish military is preparing, in terms of its scenario exercising, has been preparing for these kinds of situations. After all, they are, this is what militaries do in peacetime. They prepare for war and possibilities of war and fantasies of war. But in my view, and I say this as very much as a non-military expert, not a military expert rather, but in my view, Turkey's understanding of Black Sea and its strategy in the Black Sea has evolved since 2016. 2016 that was a very cathartic and traumatic period because of the coup attempt, and in many ways, the sentiment in Ankara was that this was either backed by NATO or would have been applauded by NATO had it succeeded. And we saw Turkey being going back to its very sort of traditional very traditional and very paranoid self, paranoid about many of the foreign powers, including NATO, including US and all of that. But then I think in 2014, but then I think increasing Russian presence in the Black Sea has led to an eventual evolution of Turkey's Black Sea policy, and sort of security challenges from a total Russian control of the Black Sea became more and more obvious. So, the 2016 to 2018 period was a bit of a glitch, I think, in terms of Turkey's understanding of regional security. What we're seeing now is a desire very clearly on Erdogan's part, but also on the part of Turkish establishment to fix relations, to improve relations with NATO, to improve, to sort of improve relations in Eastern Mediterranean and Black Sea. So we've gone from one extreme to another, and now sort of trying to calibrate back to some sort of a normalcy. It was, there's no doubt that Turkey is also worried about Russia, this sort of competitive cooperation it has developed with Russia, not just in terms of Black Sea and Ukraine, but also in Caucasus and in Libya and in Syria, whereby, initially it looked fine and everyone loved it. Erdogan and Putin, we are denying, we're sort of we're expanding our respective spheres of influence in conflict zones while being on different sides of these conflicts, and it works. You support Haftar, I support DNA in Tripoli, you support this, I support that, and it works until it doesn't. I mean, I think now Turks are realizing that this is a more difficult game and not a game, and that Russians are playing tougher than they would like.
We've had a number of fascinating questions from our audience. One of them, the first one actually, was a question about the critical importance of Ukraine to Turkey, Asli, and the view from Turkey of Ukraine's importance. Where is that coming from? You mentioned the historical relationship between Turkey and Ukraine. Are there other ones that are worth noting here?
I think Turkey has consistently supported NATO's expansion, and including former Eastern European countries and post-Soviet countries in NATO. So they have, while they are treating on this territory gingerly now, when it came to Romania, when it came to Poland and Bulgaria, Turks were not just very enthusiastic, but they also played a key role in hand-holding, helping facilitate the transition, officers going and talking to officers and playing a role in sort of helping these countries grow into transatlantic communities. So there's sort of a institutional memory of that, which is important. Ukraine is also important from a Black Sea perspective. And I think at the end of the day, Turks also, have this love and hate relationship with Russia. Yes, Erdogan has become very close to Putin and has, bought S-400s, risking US sanctions, angering NATO partners in Syria and Libya. They developed this strange agree to disagree kind of a relationship. But I think that, Turkey is increasingly realizing that, the result of the Azerbaijan-Armenian mini war last year is, Russia becoming more entrenched in the Caucasus. The result of this a possible incursion in Ukraine might be Russia becoming more entrenched. And I think on a geopolitical level, Turkey benefits from the balancing act, but not when there is a sort of one side is encroaching on its territory. Having said all that, I think that there are limits to Ukraine's importance for Turkey. obviously, it's not, I think, as existential as Syria, or it's not as existential as some of the issues on Eastern Mediterranean. So after all, Turkey has lived with the reality of Cold War as a frontier country. So I think it's not an outcome that Turkey wants. The question is, how far would it go to sort of counter that?
One of the questions from our audience, from Brendan, is puts a finer point on the broader question here about the importance of Ukraine to Turkey, and that is obviously any further push of Russian military power into Ukraine would be, in terms of realpolitik, fundamentally detrimental to Turkey's long-term security. Would you agree with that?
Well, it would be a challenge. I agree with that. And I think that, which is why they have been, for the past 2 months, Ankara has been focused on the Ukraine issue. Long before it made it to the headlines, I think they've been trying to understand what Russia wants to, and also using this, to sort of polish their perhaps NATO credentials. But I do agree that there is no appetite to see Russia increasing its leverage over Turkey and renegotiating the European security architecture that was essentially clenched in the 90s, when Turkey was very much part of that, part of the decision-making mechanisms.
Petro and Volodymyr, I'm actually paraphrasing a question from Leo, who asks about the effects of Erdogan's mediation on Ukrainian public opinion about NATO and the EU. That is, if Erdogan steps in, is there any chance of an undermining of these other institutions in the eyes of Ukrainians, and for that matter, the eyes of those in Turkey as well?
Oh, I don't think so. In my view, Ukrainians have plenty of goodwill towards Turkey and Turkish people, and a lot of respect for their position and their support, formal support, but still important support on the territorial integrity issue, on Crimea issue. So I think this will be welcomed. In fact, there might be some suspicions about what US is trying to do, what NATO is trying to do as a bloc, as an alliance. But when the Turkey itself comes in with a certain fresh initiatives and proposals, that might be really appreciated. So I think it could work. I mean, but depending, of course, on sincerity of Russia, first of all, would they agree to this idea of meeting or some kind of new format? And second of all, if they come there with sincere motivations to find a resolution, a peaceful resolution, we still don't know, what their plan was from the outset with this escalation. Are they really trying to push hard and up the ante to get some concessions from the West and Ukraine? Or are they looking for excuse to use force? So both, after many weeks, if not months of us guessing, we still don't know the answer to that question.
Right. By the way, thanks to all our attendees who are offering questions in the Q&A. We hope to get to as many of them as possible. We'll try to be as brief and concise with our answers as we can. There's a question here about Asli on the question of Turkey's opinion about the possibility of more NATO troops in Romania, for instance, as a measure to deter Russia. So would Turkey be content with more NATO troops in the Black Sea region?
I do not know specifically what the reaction is to Biden's proposal to send more NATO troops, but my guess is that Turkey would be supportive of that at this point. There have been huge debates within NATO, as you know, and one of the challenges that this Russian offensive posturing is presenting us with is that it unearthed all the fissures, all the internal contradictions within NATO, and we're already seeing that. So I think Turkey would be more of a traditionalist if it comes to that, and hope to have a unified NATO position, and particularly in supporting countries like Romania and Poland and Bulgaria, which it has, as I mentioned earlier, played a role in their transition towards NATO.
Thank you. And we have a colleague, Vsevolod Samokhvalov, who is raising his hand, actually, who we can, I think, pipe in here to this conversation. Sava, would you like to answer your question? Ask your question, please.
Answer your question as well.
And answer it as well, if you like.
I'm sure Sava is fully capable of answering his own question, yes.
Good evening, and apologies for maybe unconventional stepping in with a question. I was trying to type and then basically the hand slipped. But thank you very much, first of all, to all the speakers and for the opportunity to catch up with my former colleagues in Cambridge and professors in Odesa. So one of the, and let me start maybe with a brief kind of relay of the spirit here in Brussels in the European institutions and partly in NATO, where I conducted several interviews lately. As Professor Dubovyk has mentioned, it's not clear for the time being what is the real intention of Vladimir Putin in this situation. However, the question that I would like to address maybe to all of the speakers is that it is clear that, at least this is the spirit that is often voiced here in Brussels. It is clear that in the situation when the Russian Federation is exercising this muscle flexing postures almost every second week, or if not every month, the probability of sort of sudden and unexpected, or as somebody has put it about 100 years ago, of a big war starting with one stupid shot is growing higher and higher. And as the sides are getting locked into this expectation, aren't we facing the growing probability of this unexpected and unwanted conflict? I would like to invite everyone maybe to reflect on it. Thank you.
Petro, would you like to begin?
I don't think that's an unwanted conflict. If Russia doesn't want conflict, it can withdraw troops. It can recognize it's a part of conflict in Donbas. It can implement its part of Minsk agreements, the ceasefire, opening of the checkpoints, and so on and so forth, and drop the clause about the special status of Donbas because it's unacceptable for Ukraine, and it will never happen. So from this point of view, I don't think it's an unwanted conflict. Russia really wants to fight with the West, not Russia, I think the Putin wants to fight with the West. And secondly, you speak about the amassing troops at the border, and that reminds me the situation in 2006 when there was the first Russian-Ukrainian gas conflict happened in 1994. That was the first time when Russia just cut off in the middle of winter, and the winter of 1994-1995 was quite cold, and it cut off the Ukraine from gas supplies. And guess who suffered the most? Donetsk and Lugansk regions suffered the most. So, and it was done regardless to the people who lived there. And only in 2008 and 2009, before 2009, there was also a number of gas conflicts, at least in 2006, in 2008, and in 2005. Only in 2009, when the Russia cut off the gas supplies to Europe, the Europe started to concern. So my short answer is that for the last 6 years, Russian army has been training on their territory to defeat the Ukrainian army in the east and in the south. And only right now, when it puts their already well-trained troops to the border of Ukraine, only now the West starts to get concerned about the Russian threat. So we in Ukraine look at it with the kind of irony. So really, guys, your intelligence did not report you about what Russian military is doing all these 6 years. We don't believe, actually, we don't buy it.
Volodymyr, please.
Yeah, very briefly. I mean, Petro, and I agree with what he said. And it's good to hear from you, Seva. I would like to say that the escalation we're having right now is, if we're hopefully through it, but there'll be more escalations that we need to understand, because that's a way, that's a modus operandi that they be using in Moscow. And that's why we cannot really give in. I mean, if you do give some concessions right now, hoping that they will leave us alone, leave us be, that's not going to happen. So that's why we actually have to to keep sticking to our keep sticking to our positions and with the West and everything else, because like the logic of 2014, Ukrainians didn't fight for Crimea and they thought it was going to be the end of it, and it wasn't, because Donbas came next. And the same thing today. I mean, if we give up on certain positions and give some concessions, then there will be more escalation. So we'll be coming for more blood. So that's why it's very important. And I'm sure that you, Rory, particularly enjoyed the huge defeat of Russia by Irish seafarers, the fishermen, the other day, when they moved the big exercise of Russia away from their territory and the territorial waters.
Volodymyr, I almost wore my my Irish fisherman sweater today, my Irish fisherman jumper, just in connection with that. I'm sensitive to the 12 or so minutes we have left, and there are a number of really interesting questions here.
Yes,
so I'm going to try to
question.
package them all together and then ask our three distinguished panelists to try to take them together, offer any thoughts and feedback to them. So the three are, first of all, the question of Germany and the stance of Germany in the present conflict. That's a big question, a frustrating one in many respects. Another question about the Winter Olympics and whether or not, a global event like this is something that may delay any potential dramatic increased invasion, escalation. And the other one is something that we wanted to touch upon before we left, and that is the role of the United States here. Volodymyr, you mentioned that earlier. Biden's calculus, the question of course, his gaffe about an incursion, what they're preparing for. And then finally, if this could be added to it, a question from Miron about Putin's objective for Crimea after all this time. I know those are very diverse topics. Please don't feel like you have to answer them all, but this might be a nice way for us to conclude our discussion today, which has been wide-ranging, but hopefully organized enough. So Asli, would you like to begin? And then we'll just move with Petro and then Volodymyr.
Sure. Let me just pick up one or two. Winter Olympics, it's become it's become trendy, conventional wisdom to say that if there was to be a war in Ukraine, it would start after the Winter Olympics, because Putin might possibly attend the closing ceremony on February 20th, I think. I have no idea if this is based on any knowledge or just one of these urban myths that keep getting repeated, and then somebody hears and an official hears, he repeats it to somebody else. So my sense is that we don't really know what the Russian plans are, and we keep trying to rationalize it from where we stand, and the Winter Olympics is part of this. It may well end up being true, but I'm not sure. The role of the US is interesting, because I was actually in Washington talking also to people also about Ukraine, trying to understand it. Now, I am here on this panel very much as a non-Ukraine, not a specialist of Russia or Ukraine, but the way I saw it is there was obviously a camp of very, very supportive of Ukraine's right to choose its destiny, whether it's NATO or EU institutions. But also I noticed a less audible, but clearly a reflex, another group among policymakers or think tank community that believed at the end of the day, Russia had security concerns that they've been raising consistently, and it would be important to engage in a conversation with them, not give away everything, but they've been consistently raising some issues that the West and NATO has been ignoring and oblivious. And I think it's very important to understand that there are two camps in the West. Not everybody is on has the same tolerance level for the tension with Russia that this process will involve. Even within the administrations and governments, there are different camps. I think that while everyone pays a lip service to Ukraine's right to be part of NATO, none of us are missing the point that nobody is giving membership prospects to Ukraine at the moment or in the past. So these are some of the internal contradictions of the Western and NATO posturing, which brings me to perhaps the final point I want to make. I think, I don't know what Putin wants to negotiate in terms of Ukraine and the order, the European security order. It's clearly what we're seeing is bigger than Ukraine, but I don't really have any evidence or that he wants it all and entire Soviet space. So I think the truth is somewhere there probably. But what is really more important than that is how events unfold will largely depend on what the Western reply will be. And I really don't know where it will come down in the end. That fine line, between wanting to negotiate with Russia, but not wanting to negotiate with Russia, wanting to give in a little bit, not wanting to give in a little bit. I think in the end, this whole crisis is telling us more about the problems within the Western transatlantic community than it's telling us about Russia.
Thank you. And Petro?
Yes, very briefly about Germany. I think that in the last 2 months, Putin managed to achieve the thing that our diplomats were very hard to achieve for the last 8 years. So we have to thank him. He consolidated a lot of support of Germany, and I think he actually provoked the change of political thinking in Germany. About the Olympic Games, so I heard sometimes that the Sochi Winter Olympiad was compared to Berlin Olympiad, a Summer Olympiad in 1936. I hope that Beijing Olympiad this year would not be compared to the Winter Olympiad in Garmisch-Partenkirchen in 1940. So let's hope it will not be compared. And about the Crimea, very short and very briefly, I think it's forgotten. And from the point of view of Kremlin, they've established there a huge military base, and to intimidate people, maybe in Crimea we've got one of the most repressive regimes against the people who live there, compared maybe to Chechnya, and that's it. So I think that the Kremlin is happy with the current situation in Crimea, and they don't care about the people.
Thank you, Petro. Volodymyr.
Right, quickly, since we are reaching our time limit, on Germany, yes, there was a lot of disappointment here in Ukraine, but for the wrong reasons, because people would expect something like that, what Germany is doing. Actually, they're doing even more, perhaps, to support Ukraine than was expected of them. Yes, a pacifistic country, yes, definitely, consciously limiting its hard power. And a special relationship with Germany, even though just as today, I think I saw a statement by press secretary of Social Democratic Party who said that there is an end to special relationship of Germany with Russia, but still limited, and some hopes on the new coalition, but that coalition is really a fragile thing. And actually, I can very well see how the situation around Ukraine can actually end that coalition, quite frankly, because it might be a major crisis within Germany because of this division of positions within the coalition. On Winter Olympics, I think it's something that Kremlin doesn't give a damn about, frankly. And we can also remember that Putin gave order to start the August War 2008 from the Olympics. So I don't think it's a major factor here. On NATO membership, that's interesting because indeed Ukraine is not going to become a member anytime soon, and Moscow knows that. And yet they demand on this particular clause as something of a matter of importance. So I think they really want this kind of big treaty, like permanent neutrality treaty of Ukraine, as a way to just boast their status and humiliate the West and humiliate Ukrainians and put us in our corner or something like that. Maybe something like that, because Biden is already saying Ukraine is not going to be in NATO, and everybody is saying. But this, not only informal, but even public statements now by Western leaders is not enough for Russia. It doesn't cut. So they really need something more. And finally, I think they need to. They would like the new Cold War. That's a major takeaway that I would bring from this situation. That if everyone in the West is trying to avoid the new Cold War with Russia, in Moscow they would love it. I mean, because they really miss the old one when they were really respected and feared, and they were talking, to Washington as equals, and that's what Putin is enjoying right now. He's talking as equals. They would really mobilize them. They would really give them another line of arguments about the besieged fortress Russia it is, and everyone is against us. That would really, strengthen the regime from within. So there are many benefits, and I think they actually have upper hand. I'm afraid that they think in Moscow they have upper hand in military technology right now with hypersonic missiles and other things. That the West is, decaying. That the West is getting weaker and Russia is getting stronger. And it's the right moment for them to prove, to prove that they are the major player in the region.
Well, one of the issues we talked about briefly at the start was the question of the Crimean Tatars, and Matthew Poley in Michigan asked about the crackdown, which has been growing, of course, on Crimean Tatar activists in particular. One of them is Nariman Celal, who's facing a 20-year sentence. Many others as well. This is a consistent, concerted effort on the part of the Kremlin and their proxies in occupied Crimea to crack down on Crimean Tatar civil society. And in the midst of all these issues and factors that obviously evoke in all of us a sense of hopelessness sometimes, I would encourage everyone to visit sites like Crimea SOS or Crim SOS, which have a lot of updates about this particular issue, and to be particularly aware and sensitive to that going on, to not forget that these crackdowns take place not only on Crimean Tatar civil society, but Ukrainian civil society in occupied Crimea too. That's attached or relevant to this crisis with the military escalation, but also something that goes well beyond it. I think these times are difficult. They're nerve-wracking, as we've been saying. I want to speak personally here and just say that it is a comfort still to be able to have such exchanges with colleagues who are willing to give up their time to inform us all. I want to express my gratitude to our three distinguished guests, Asli, Aydıntaşbaş, Petro, Burkovskyi, Volodymyr, Dubovyk. We have appreciated your insights and expertise and your sensitivities. And I also like to thank all of our participants for joining us. We wish you all well. And I guess I will leave us all with a goodbye and also a phrase I learned probably in April 1995, a long time ago. Hai живе Україна. It was one of my first sentences as a student of Ukrainian. Let Ukraine live. Viva Ukraine. Thank you all very much, and all the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Rory.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Thank you, Asli.
Volodymyr, побачимося в Києві.
Побачимось, так.